Hello everyone, welcome to my new session on Vehicle Live, my YouTube channel. Today's topic is HTTP client patterns. I'm pretty sure that all of you are familiar with what HTTP client is, and today I'm going to talk about it not from, it's not going to be a total overview of HTTP client. I'm not going to explain in details. I will assume that you know how to use it, how to place calls. If not, I can cover that in a different topic. But for now, I wanted to focus on some patterns, how to use HTTP client and how to build an architecture around HTTP client whenever you have to talk to external services. So here is the URL. As always, all of my examples are available publicly on my GitHub. So please feel free to follow my examples with me, clone this repository, and you will see which branch I'm in, and you can switch to the same branch, check the code, and see what is going on. So I don't have many slides. I'm immediately simply just going to go into a demo. Before I go there, this is the repository. So as you know already, there are several branches. I will start with main, and then I will get up to step 6. Step 6 is the last branch, which includes the final proposed state of the solution that I'm going to present. So before I explain the code, I will just run this demo and I will show what it does. So here I have a very simple weather forecast page where I first look up a location. I'm of course going to use my location. So I'm going to search for Zagreb. And then when I select Zagreb, it shows me the weather forecast for the next couple of days. Or I can try something like new, and then I can select New York, or I can select New Delhi, and then I get different weather forecasts. So this is the solution that we're going to play around today. So apparently I'm using a web service for this, and let's take a look at what exactly I do and how. So first, of course, I have this page. The page is extremely simple. I have this search group where I have just one search field, which is bound to a variable called search. And then when I validate it, I call this MetaWeather web service. So what is this MetaWeather web service? First, I call this getLocation service. And here, what I have is a very naive way of actually calling a web service or REST endpoint from AL. So what I do is I simply declare this HTTP client and I call the get method. And here, I hope for the best. I hope that everything will work fine. And if something doesn't work fine, I'm fine with the error being propagated. So if the URL is wrong, I will see that the URL is wrong. If there is a different kind of error, I will just see that. So, however, this is, as I said, this is a very naive way of calling a web service, and we will shortly see why. And then if everything works fine, if this succeeds, then I'm going to reset the temporary table that I've received as a parameter. Then I'm going to delete all records in there. And then I'm going to read the content from my response. And then I'm going to read those contents into a locations array, which is a JSON array. And then I'm iterating through this array, reading each object, and then I'm simply parsing whatever I receive. Let's actually take a look at this URL. I'm going to take it. I'm going back to my web client, and here I'm going to search for the same query that I searched for Zagreb. So here I get an array where I get some response. I'm actually going to just make it a tiny little bit bigger so that here we can see what the content of this web service are. So I parse this, and then I store this in this weather forecast table. And then my page receives this. Something else also happens. I have on get current record, on after get current record, where I take a look if this WOEID, which is, as you can see, the identifier. That's how this web service identifies each location. If this is different than 0, which means I have currently selected a different location, then I'm calling my subpage. My subpage has this update method which receives this the same ID by integer, and then I call another web service which is getForecast. So I retrieve the forecasts for that location. And here I do exactly the same, a very naive way of calling the web service, where I simply just call the get method, and I can take a look at what this one will receive. So I'm just going to take this, go back to my browser, paste this here. I'm going to take this ID, I'm going to put it into the URL and load that. So this is the response I will get. It has one property called consolidated weather, and then it has an array which has a number of objects, each of which has ID, which is weather forecast ID, and then some state, whatever. I'm not going to explain the content in there. What I do with this content is I actually parse this. Again, very similar. I read it as string, then I read it into my JSON object, then I retrieve my consolidated weather node, and I read it into an array, and then I iterate through that array and populate this weather forecast table. And the end result is, as you can see, I can try Brussels, and then you can see this is the weather in Brussels, for example. So this is a very naive example of how you could just get and solve the problem. Let's now switch to the next branch. I'm going to reload my my window, and then let's take a look at what I have changed here. So the page is the same and the subpage is the same, and they will remain the same for the rest of this demo. So I'm just going to close them, and I will not be talking about them anymore. But this one will change. So let's take a look at what I have done here. First, let's take a look at this get locations. I apologize. Let me see what I have changed between these two versions. Sorry, I apologize. So if we take a look at what I did here, I had two very ugly functions. The function was reading the content from the REST endpoint, and then it was doing the logic thing, parsing it and storing it into a record. And what I've done in the new version is that I've separated that. So this is a good practice, that you separate the business logic, which is this, JSON to location and JSON to forecast. These are two new functions, from the web client logic. So, and that's the only thing I've changed. It just works exactly the same way as the previous one worked. But this is still a very naive way of calling the web service, because I didn't take care of anything with this invocation itself. So why is this problematic? Like, why does this code not necessarily work as expected? First, because when you're talking to web services, you need to understand that there are two things happening. The first thing happening is the transport, which is the TCP/IP protocol which connects your machine to their machine. And this transport has to succeed. Transport can fail if, I don't know, if the target host is down, if your network is down, if you have mistyped the URL, or for any number of other reasons, your host may not be able to reach the target host. And this is the transport part. And if transport fails, this one will result in a runtime error. And it will tell you, I don't know, the host is unreachable, or whatever other error was detected, like timeout or something like that, that the transport fails, this client method fails as well. And I can capture the result of this. I could do if not, then maybe exit, just to go out if something is wrong. But that wouldn't solve the entire problem. But okay, that would be a first step. So that takes care of the transport problem. But there can be other things. Like, for example, I can go here and I can attempt to ask a question like this. And this is now not a transport issue. My host responded. It just responded with HTTP error 403. And the problem here is that this will succeed. And I'm not taking any steps to check if I have actually received a valid response. So this means that this might fail in a very ugly runtime error, which is not what you want to have. So let's take a look at the step 2 and let's see what has changed there. So what I've done here is I have intentionally broken the URL. So you can see that this URL is now broken. So it's misspelled over there. So when I run this and then attempt to load something like Zagreb, see that I get a runtime error here on this line. And when I run over that, I will stop the debugger. Now I don't need it anymore. It tells me that the remote name could not be resolved, metaweather.com. But that's just one part of the problem. What I want to do is this. I want to actually uncomment this line. And I want to run with correct URL, but incorrect search instead of search, incorrect argument to the REST endpoint. So when I run this and then attempt to look up, well, I get a runtime error here, and this is not what I like. So I don't want that. It tells me that data does not represent a valid JSON token. And this is not what you want to see. Maybe you're fine with seeing host is unreachable or timeout trying to connect or whatever other transport error. But you do not want to see this. Like, the user doesn't care about this. This is what you as a developer need to take care of. So let's take a look at the next correct example of how this should be actually approached. So I'm going to step 3. Let me just make sure I don't leave any trash. So inside of my step 3, I have actually taken steps to make sure that I'm calling it correctly. So two things can go wrong, as we have seen. First, transport can fail. This is this part. And response may not contain the success status code. So thankfully, there is this isSuccess status code function on response, so you don't have to evaluate in different individual status codes to figure out if you should accept or not. This one tells you if any of success status codes were returned. So if either it failed on transport or it failed on server, I mean, server was reached, but something failed in the business process of that server, then we end up in here, in this block. And I added this to-do here, not as a to-do for me, but just to explain that normally you would like to do some cleanup, some housekeeping, maybe log the error, maybe notify somebody, or whatever other thing you want to do before you actually throw the error. And here I say something went wrong and I show the last error. This is not good enough. I mean, this will be good if this has failed. But if this didn't fail, then I should actually look into response and read the response and check the status code. But I didn't want to complicate. I just wanted to show that with this approach, with this if not client get or not response to status code, you can block the situation that fails for whatever reason, handle it, and then exit out or error out, whichever you want. And then if I have reached this, it means that my web service has responded and then that it has responded successfully, so that I'm safe to actually parse the content of the JSON object I have received and process it in my application. So I do the same on both web services. And in fact, I still have this incorrect URL. So let's take a look at what happens now. I'm going to try again. And now it fails here. And I'm going to stop the debugger. And it tells me, okay, that something went wrong. An error occurred while sending the request. The remote name could not be resolved. So this is fine. I get an error and I need to do something about it as a user. Maybe I can fix it, maybe not, but at least I have handled the situation where something goes wrong. And that's about this this pattern. I want to improve on that because here apparently I did not check inside my error handling block. Was this a response error or transport error, or was it something else? So let's take a look at something, a pattern that I always use when I'm calling web services is this. I have this, I call it a filter method. This method receives two parameters. It receives a transport OK parameter, which is Boolean. And if this is false, it means that invocation failed on the transport layer, which means the host wasn't reached, host was down, network was down, whatever other reason, or DNS couldn't resolve it, whatever. So this will be false. And then I have a response, which I can look into. And if this is true, which means transport succeeded, then I need to check the error response from here and handle it. So how do I call this is successful request filter method? Like this. I simply say if not is successful request, and then I place the call. Now I'm inspecting its Boolean value so it won't fail. And then I pass the response, which was filled up with this method. I pass it onto the same filter method. So I have one single place that I call from both of my web services. There is no code duplication. Just to remind you, there was some duplication before. I had this and I had this, which is in essence boilerplate code, which is duplicated. And the more complex this part is, the less happy you will be duplicating it. So you can deduplicate it like this. So now you can put it in this place. This transport OK will tell you if transport succeeded. This will contain a response that you can inspect if transport did succeed. And if transport didn't succeed, you could just read last error text that will tell you why transport failed. And then I exit. This may be unnecessary depending on whether this one errors or not, but still, just in case, I exit if this one tells me that this did not succeed. And then if this succeeded, I can proceed and process my my content retrieved from the web service. So this is a better way of approaching the HTTP client calls, to wrap them into this filter method, inspect their transport success, and then inspect their message. And then you have minimum amount of duplication. But still, you might want to take it one step further. And that one step further is, I will not say that I'm stealing the idea from Waldo, because it was our common session 2 years ago at Tech Days, where we have been talking about calling web services, and then Waldo has presented some kind of a web service management code unit. And I have that. This is a management where you can have all of different HTTP client methods. Since I'm only using GET, I only exposed GET, but you could use POST or SEND or whichever you want. Just for simplicity, I kept it at GET. So whenever you want to place a call to a web service, you call httpmanagement.get rather than httpclient.get. And then you pass the URL and you receive this response in exactly the same way. And also you get the success Boolean. So you receive the Boolean output just as if you would with any other invocation to HTTP GET. Alternatively, you could skip this Boolean and turn it into try function. It's completely up to you. I do not want to do that, didn't want to do that, just in case that you are, for whatever reason, invoking this inside of a database write transaction. So I think this is robust enough. So what do I do inside this GET? I first can do some pre-invocation checks. Maybe you want to allow certain web service calls per user, maybe per time of day. Maybe you want to retrieve a URL from a database, or alternative URL, or whatever else. Like there can be a number of things that you want to do every single time before you place a web service call to some endpoint. And then if this part succeeds, then you proceed with exactly the same pattern that I had before. I'm still calling the same transport method. where I pass this, sorry, a filter method where I get this transport OK and response, and then I do the same checks. I can again do the post-processing checks here, like I can log the details, who has placed the request, when, what URL that was, did it succeed, if not, what was the error, etc., etc. I can do all of them inside of this filter method. And then I return the success status, which must be an end result of both transport OK and success status. And then I pass that to the caller. And then my caller is now my get forecast, which looks pretty much like it looked at the very beginning, except that it's much more robust. So I don't care in what ways this can fail. I simply call it, and if it doesn't succeed, I just exit out. And then I could run that, and you would see that it still gives me the same error. Actually, no, I've fixed this time. So yeah, let me run this and prove to you that this works. So I can go here, I can do Zagreb again, and then it will succeed. It will first call Zagreb, select Zagreb, and then switch. Or I can try San, and then I can go to San Antonio, and then I get different results than when I click, for example, Santorini, and then get something else. So this is the semi-final or penultimate step of my session today. I want to take this one step further. I actually want to make this interface based. So let's take a look at my step 6, and here I'm going to reload my window because there is a lot of differences. So here I have changed a lot. I've changed both of my pages. So here my page is no longer calling the meta weather code unit. I don't even have just one, I have two. And why is it? Because I want to control the invocation on a completely different level. I want to control it on the method level, not on the endpoint level. And let's take a look at what I mean. So first I have this interface called HTTP request, where I have one single method, which is called execute. And this method receives this parameter by reference response. So you will call execute on any code unit that implements this interface, and then it will return true or false whether it succeeded, and it will contain the response received from the web service. My HTTP management code unit is now not receiving the URL anymore. It's receiving the request interface instance. And what it does is it still wraps it in the same filter method. This one is exactly the same as it used to be, except that I'm calling request.execute. So I'm deferring actual execution of web service to whoever wants to handle that. This is that code unit which will successfully execute it. So, and I have two. I have search code unit, which is in charge of meta weather search invocation. And here I've actually embedded all the logic of this search method invocation into this code unit, which implements this HTTP request. So I have search URL, I have locations. Let me just not jump ahead. Let me explain how I intend to use this. Let me keep this open, and I'm going into my page. And instead of simply calling metaweather dot get locations and then passing the record variable from here, what I'm doing is I'm specifying that I want to search on this term. So this search method is kind of an initializer. It stores the search term into my global variable. What I do then is I call http.execute. I'm simply asking this HTTP management code unit to execute my method, and I'm passing the instance of metaweather search into it. So this execute will come here. It will read this. It will have metaweather search code unit here. It will execute it, and then what happens? Then this happens. My execute actually has the client part. It calls the if not client get and then response, and then it exits with false if it doesn't succeed. This is enough. And then if this succeeds, I go on and I read the contents. I store the contents in my locations array. So my array is now initialized with the correct content. and this execute returns true or false. So if execute returns false, my HTTP management will return false as well, and then my page will not execute this part. But if my execute method returns true, then this part will happen. And then in this part, I'm reading the results. I'm executing the business logic part of this. So I'm reading the results from this JSON array, locations array, and I'm reading them into my temp location. And I have the same for the forecast. So if I take a look at my sub page, it has the update method. Now I have a different instance of my HTTP request interface. I have this code unit, which I initialize with a different parameter. So I'm storing this WOA-ID in a global variable. Then I'm again calling HTTP execute on that method. I'm saying, please execute this method. This HTTP management will then do everything that it needs to do, check the permissions, log the results, etc. And then if it succeeds, I will read the forecast into my record and I will update the current page. So let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to call it, and then let's try with San Antonio and San Francisco and Santa Cruz, etc. So that's it. This is all I have actually prepared for today, and let's talk. Let's address your questions. So let me open my chat, and let's take a look at what we have here. So hi, nice to see you all again. It's Q&A time. Last time I had this live blog, there were no questions at all. And then I said to Waldo, what is this like? Are people not interested? And then Waldo told me, well, you're talking about control identities. Nobody cares about control identities. When people need control identities, they will call you and ask for your help. But okay, this time it's a different topic. So I assume you know things about this, and yeah. Okay, AJ. On a side note, but important to check, if the call was blocked by an environment. Yes, this is another one. So actually, we can do that. And this is part of this filter. I intentionally didn't complicate this. Let's go in here. We can, this one. So you can block web services. You can, there are ways to prevent invocations, in which case Business Central will say, no, I'm not allowing this call. And if this happens, you will also know that. And this is something you also need to take care of inside here. That is absolutely true. Thanks for mentioning. I didn't want to complicate intentionally, because my goal with this session was to show how I believe we should wrap our invocation methods into interfaces. And actually, I forgot to say why. It's because of testability. And once you have this architecture, which is based on interfaces, this is testable. And it's testable without you having to depend on web services being there when you want to call them. And I'm not going to show testability today. I'm going to invite you to join me for my testability webinar, where I'm going to be talking about how to write testable code. So how to design and architect your code that it can be easily testable. And yes, when you're calling web services, the worst thing you can do with testability is just call them from your tests. And here with interfaces, you don't have to do that. So there is another question. How to log call and response when we need to throw error because call or response is not good? So you could do log whatever, you have a method which logs, and then you do then you commit, and then you error. So that's how. I mean, you just log before you throw the error. Telemetry, session log message for logging errors. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. I mean, all of this belongs there. And once you have this HTTP management code unit that has this filter method, you can take care of this here. You can log telemetry in here that invocation was started or whatever, and you can log that it was successful. But I mean, it's up to you. You can take care of that part. What is your opinion about using the HTTP request as an input parameter containing the URL, headers, and content? That is also a possibility, and this is something that makes a lot of sense. Again, for exactly the same reasons, I did not want to complicate. I did not want to make this a comprehensive session on using HTTP client. Maybe I can do that once. However, if we want to really make it fully testable, which is relevant, I wouldn't actually ever be using HTTP request or HTTP response types directly. I would actually use a code unit wrapper for response and a code unit wrapper for request types. And then I would use them, because then you can actually mock them. If you're using real requests and real responses, then it's going to be a lot difficult. But yes, you can absolutely do that. This is also a viable approach. I do not agree with Waldo. Control is a cool topic. Yeah, I also don't agree with Waldo, but last time nobody cared, nobody asked a single question. Bjarki asks, doesn't the new instances open up unnecessary sockets? Should the client instance be reused with base address set? Actually, I don't think so. Like, I don't think that you would actually suffer from that. I would always use that. I wouldn't reuse HTTP client instances. I don't see that. I never experienced any problems with that. Maybe you have, and if it makes sense for you to reuse HTTP client, then by all means do. I mean, if we take a look at this, this, it doesn't have to place the client call itself. It can still call HTTP management, which places the actual client call. That would be fine. It's just that, I somehow don't see a problem with just cleaning up garbage, collecting my client instances, and then creating new ones when I need to. So I would have to check in the .NET documentation to see if there would be any problems with this approach or not. Morton asks, how to authorize. Is this complex to set up? No, it's not. So there is a session by Waldo and me 2 years ago at Tech Days. So Tech Days 2019, we are showing how to do OAuth from AL. Also AJ, I believe he blogged about that. He also has a webinar and some content. AJ, please correct me if I'm wrong, but AJ has a lot of stuff on OAuth and how to use it, but it is not. Actually, the HTTP client object is designed to be reused. For example, to set authorization one time and then do multiple requests. Well, if that's what you want and what you need, you can easily do that from here. As I said, like you could have an instance of HTTP management code unit which controls one single instance of client, and then you use that client which authenticates and whatever. So, yeah. Thanks AJ for kicking in. About Morton's question, or it's here we're talking about the backend flow, service to service flow. So this is something that we addressed, Waldo and I addressed from our session, and I believe AJ also addressed in his content. So there are different OAuth flows for different kinds of authentication. When you have service to service communication, you will not have the same flow that you will have when you have client to service authentication. Yeah. So, and AJ confirms that he will blog more about this in the near future. Okay. Anything else? I'm going to wait for a few more seconds and then If you have no more questions or comments, I'll just close the session. Okay. Thanks, Michael. Well, I think I will just move into closing this session. So, okay. Is there a difference between return value and try function? Well, there is a difference, because try function, if you call try function without inspecting its return value and it fails, then you get a runtime error. Whereas if you have this situation here, if you invoke this without inspecting its success value, then it will not fail. It will just silently move over. So that's a big difference between calling a try function and having a function which returns a boolean. It is, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, AJ, for nice comments. Thank you, Muli, for kind words. And yeah. So I'm now going to close this session. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you find this useful. Examples are available online. I will build more on top of this. I will look into other areas. And apparently you have asked questions which tell me that you would like to see different approaches. So maybe I will just keep building on top of this for the next couple of live sessions, and then see where it takes us. And yes, again, I'm going to advertise my my testability webinar, where I'm going to talk about how to use interfaces, how to structure your code properly to be easily testable, and this will include also web service calls. So with that said, I wish you a nice weekend, and see you next week. Thanks for attending. Bye.